Okay, so what I'm going to do in this segment is to take the sort of the generic discussion I had yesterday, presented yesterday, and tell you how that applied to the Motel project. And then I'm going to take you through what my research has been on the office building, so that when you walk through it, you can have a sense of what you're looking at and how to look at, most importantly, how to look at what you're going to see. We found some original drawings of the office building, and I've printed out my presentation, my little analytical exercise for each team. I've got one for each team. So I hope that when this session's finished in this process of getting over to the building, that you come together as teams and you go through the building as a team, so that you can start discussing what you're seeing, processing that information, and understanding different people's perspectives about it. So Ben actually covered some of what I was going to talk about, but that's okay. The interesting thing about this project is it has two periods of significance. And I'll go through how that evolved, but clearly before we could understand or organize the information we gathered, we needed to have some sense of what time frame we were going to be focused on, or time frames, and we needed to establish that period of significance. So clearly this was the 1963 date was the primary period of significance for the Motel. But the Motel expanded in 1968. So the question was, and you heard somebody allude to it earlier, Ben mentioned that there was at one point an idea that they would tear down the 68 piece and actually build a new building and reclaim the 53 Motel and keep it for its primary significance. Obviously that didn't happen. It didn't happen in part because the Park Service, as you heard, felt like it was important to have that full history of the first and main African-American motel in Alabama, retain its full integrity, while at the same time meeting the objective of the primary period of significance of 1963. Now we had, as I say, we have the original drawings from 1954, and based on the research we have, substantially what was built in 1954 is what existed in 1963. So we're relying a lot on the original drawings to guide us in early photographs. So sources of our information obviously are reading and gathering as much information, perspectives, broader, bringing it back down into focus about the movement, about the particular area, and then about the building, about the people, the broader social context, and back to the building. So there's that kind of deep narrative, as I've heard it described, that is a typical part of this process. Something that's hard to do in this kind of quick exercise, but I hope you'll get a sense of the importance, the essential importance of doing that deep research and getting deeply connected with the physical features that exist. So here is an important photo. When we walked through the parking court the other day, you saw that they were talking about where the table was set up for the news conference. It's back in this area actually that where the little sort of grotto, it had a fountain, it had umbrellas, it had plant material back in that courtyard. And I'll go through how we use these to help inform us on what we defined as contributing and non-contributing. So it included the evolution of the property, the conditions at the time of the important events, and the identification of the character-defining features. So the conditions at the time of the important events, that's something when you go through this building and when we talk about the information that I'm going to tell you about the office building, it's going to be an interesting discussion about how you deal with that, and also the identification of character-defining features. So here was as Ben showed you, here was the 1954 piece, the 1968 piece. I'm not going to go through those again. You've heard this piece, you've seen these. So actually this piece, not sure which way I'm going. A second. Yeah. This is that courtyard area in the back. So of course, when that building went away, when the Civil Rights Institute was built, then that changed the character from the 1963 setting. So this is an illustration of my point about it not being in black and white. It's in gray because we can't actually recreate everything that exists. So it then becomes, in my mind, an exercise of when you have these important features that don't exist, how do you communicate, how do you interpret the importance of that zone when 1/3 of its boundary no longer exists? Again, it's a matter of having a strong intellectual framework about what you're trying to achieve, and then coming up with ways to respond in architectural terms, respond in interpretive terms, etc. This is a photograph, I think you saw it earlier, but you can see this was a very early photograph because here's a building in the back, here's one of the buildings in the back, and you can see that there was no addition, no restaurant addition. Well, Gaston added the restaurant addition sometime within a year or two after he opened the motel. So this is not fully the period of significance because we'll want to put that, and it exists, we'll want to put that into the project. The other thing you can see here is the sign. So there's no pylon sign. This was the main sign. Other interesting thing, and you'll see it in another photograph when you go look on the other side of the porte-cochere, it says no exit. So it means that there was a back way. You didn't turn around and come back out this way. You went out in the back, which you can't do anymore. So you see this quick progression of evolution of the food service aspect of the project. And somebody, I don't know, Ted, was it you mentioning to me Pascal's? Somebody mentioned to me Pascal's. Do you know Pascal's? Pascal's in Atlanta is the similar African-American hotel, restaurant, lounge, and hotel that was the anchor of the civil rights activities and black community activities in Birmingham at a similar time. And Ted was saying that there was communication between Pascal's, which doesn't surprise me, and the role of the restaurant in the supper club. So, you know, when civil rights leaders were at Pascal's, they could sleep. They had meeting space. They could have meetings. They could go to the Carousel Lounge and relax. And in this whole notion of safety and security, you could have that all in one place. So it really, that part of it, I think, was really very important. So as you see, Gaston was expanding his facility along the same lines. So this is a set of the original drawings. So we have very good drawings, and this is an area that, because of the work done in '82, was changed dramatically. I mean, we're going to, when you talk about approach to treatment, this is where there's going to have to be a lot of focused reconstruction. So when I talked about reconstruction in a global scale, if we were talking about tearing this down and rebuilding it, not a preservation treatment. But if we're talking about taking the information and augmenting the fundamental pieces that are here, that's something we have a better chance to do. However, I go back to my earlier point. We're still doing that as of today. And I think it's important that the original fabric be clearly understood, as we're also trying to define a way to interpret through reconstruction information that's been lost. We don't have a lot of photographs of the coffee shop, for example. But we have evidence of tile that was there, that in a corner, that they didn't take it all out. And so we can, through sort of archaeological techniques, we can identify components that can add understanding. So as I've gone through, so this is the 1960, again, photographs from 1963. You can see here, this is the office buildings in the background. Here's our do not enter sign. You can say it came out the other way. The characteristics of the brick, so when we look at the brick, we can say, gee, this is original or not, you know, in terms of what's out there. The window system exists. It's behind plywood, so we've been through the building and we understand what fabric exists. When you look at the fascia board, it's in very deteriorated shape, missing in others, but it's a character-defining feature, and we'll be using that as a guide for how to treat the building. The walkway across the top obviously was not there at the time. That will come off. So all of these things start to help us build an understanding of what the relationship of time to the physical environment then and the physical environment now, and how to get from where we are now to respectfully treating the area, what exists. The motel sign, again, we have, when you see a green arrow, that was my clue for what's contributing. So these are all things that the planters, oops. Well,
just go back and touch the screen somewhere else.
Let me see, I just need to, I don't want to, there we go. So even things like the drapes, you know, we know what they were using on, and we have some interior images, but we have wood window systems, we have metal window systems, and some of the window systems that were there then are no longer there, and we'll need to recreate those. Now we see the restaurant addition. So this represents, combined with the other photos, this represents what our conditions are in the period of significance. However, the new building was built up to this wall, so this piece will not be reclaimed, this old porch, because this became a major entry point into the restaurant. So when they expanded the restaurant, they didn't bring people through the coffee shop. They had a door to go into the restaurant, and it was on this side. The infill panels, you'll see all of these areas in here are covered with what's called texture 111. It's just a plywood like sheeting with vertical scoring on it. But the characteristics of the features behind it are intact, so we have the ability to reclaim those. This is an image of what it was like. So I want you to look particularly at this configuration here of the windows, and the door pattern, which is different from today. These are images of the war room. So we actually have found images of the war room, and we found reference to the facility having Herman Miller furniture. Now, if any of y'all know modern furniture, Herman Miller is the premier maker of modern furniture, and these pieces, some of these pieces, are early Herman Miller pieces. So it was in architectural terms, that represents a certain quality level, And here you can see the white and black tile in the bathroom, the kind of carpet, the light fixture, it's important. This is how you separated. The war room was the only suite in the hotel. So Dr. King stayed in the war room. He could pull the curtain across and have his own sleeping quarters, and he could have his meetings and planning meetings in the sitting room area that you see. And that's why it's so important in terms of the Park Service's interest in interpreting the property, that this be a focal point of that interpretation. The 68 edition happened. That, as you know, cut off this little entry, expanded the kitchen again, added a few more guest rooms, and you can see now this new sign showing up. So this sign, while it's important to the collective history of the motel as an African-American motel, was not a part of the period of significance. And so how we deal with those two is another sort of what I'll call gray area of trying to tell a story clearly and at the same time communicate the breadth of what we're trying to communicate here. So this is the 1968 piece. And you can see, think about the cultural landscape, think about the landscape, you can see there were no trees around here at that time. Later photo, the sign has changed. Mr. Gaston put a mansard roof on and built a new door. And this is a zone where we're going to be reclaiming the original, or the restaurant addition, that early restaurant addition. So how we deal with the future food service restaurant facility will be another discussion. But basically the balance of this is intact. Some of it structurally got some problems, but not without being able to deal with them. Again, here's a good shot. This is where we see what that little rest area, recreation zone, umbrellas with seating, planting, a little water fountain. You can see a water fountain right here. A fountain, ornamental fountain. There was an oak tree that sat in here. It's no longer there. This is what Ben was referring to is how do we deal with that at this point? Again, looking at the window treatments, and we'll talk about that in a minute. This is where the bomb went off. So if you're standing looking at the motel from 5th Street, it's on the left-hand side, and it's pretty far back. They've patched it in a way that you have to look pretty carefully to see how the brick work has changed to know where it happened. But it's clear where it happened, and the question is, how do we deal with this piece? And from an interpretive standpoint, is there a reason to do anything architecturally that communicates that point in that event? So what we've dealt with is determining the remaining character-defining features and the condition of the building. Now, we'll say, just so you know, the motel is a steel frame building. It's a fairly light building in building terms. It is basically steel pipe that tie into steel beams that with bar joists, what are called bar joists. They're little trusses all made out of steel that span from the brick wall along the long side to the steel frame along the walkway, and it supports the floor. So there's a steel, basically a sheet of corrugated steel that lays over the bar joist, and you pour concrete topping on that, and that's what that structure is. So it's a fairly straightforward design system, building system, but we're very concerned about the amount of exposure it's had to the weather, and whether we're not so much concerned about rust in and of itself as we are about the amount of rusting that's taken place and whether it's reduced the cross-section of any steel member. Once you start reducing the cross-section of the member, then you start losing structural integrity. So we're prepared to have to deal with some aspects, either by supplemental structure. So we're going to say we're not going to take that out because that's fabric we want to keep, but we might put in some supplemental structure to take care of the work that the lost cross-section has required. Again, another architectural technique absolutely related to how we deal with the fabric and preserve it. The assessment team is architectural historian, preservation architects, structural engineer. We typically, it's very important for us to work with a structural engineer that understands old buildings, and in structural terms, this is an old building. And if they don't, they try to apply new codes in a way that are damaging. There's an anxiety about the performance of their outcomes of their judgment if they don't have experience dealing in these intuitive kind of environments. We basically work off the notion of if the building's standing, if the building is reasonably vertical, if it's designed to carry a certain amount of load and we're not changing those loads, then it's probably going to be all right. If we start changing the loads, then we've got an issue. So we don't want to go make some huge structural thing because an abstract concept or calculation says, oh gee, if you were doing this today, you'd do it this way. We try to use common sense and say, well, if it's designed for this and it's been used for this for this many years and it's still standing, then what we want to do then, I'll get to you in a second, what we want to do then is if there is an issue beyond a certain load, let's say we have a series of 40 passenger busloads of people coming, and that's going to put a load on the building beyond what the structure is designed to handle, then you handle that from a management standpoint. You only take a certain number of people to that level at a time, and you manage the load capacity that way. So. Well, typically with preservation, there is a recognition in the building codes that deal with existing buildings and with historic buildings. So you're able to get into a discussion, and generally the concept, I mean, in cases of life safety, there is a discussion about that as well. There are multiple ways to skin a cat, but you go through an exercise with the building officials, working off of the existing building code, recognizing and accepting what historic fabric is, and you work through that to come up. So in terms of fire safety, sometimes a sprinkler system, for instance, can't work, but you can have annunciators, you can have smoke alarms, you can have fire alarms tied into the the fire department. There are all kinds of ways you can enhance. You can have smoke barriers that can be hidden, things like that. So there are a lot of techniques that you can put together to deal with code kinds of things like that. So hazardous materials is an important issue. It is what it is. I think it's important to know what it is and what it isn't. It's also important not so much to get in the middle of getting it out in a proper regulatory way. It is important to engage with the environmental contractors and the firm doing the abatement bid documents, that what they're proposing, how they're proposing to do it, does not damage the building. So there are a lot of ways, different ways to abate materials, and including encapsulation. And so it's important to engage with the environmental people before that work is done, and see that that work is done in a way, one, where they understand what's important and needs to stay, and that they take it out in a way that doesn't hurt the conditions that you want to preserve. And then we have a materials conservator, so we do paint and mortar analysis. And so we've identified original colors. And so we have a palette of material colors and so forth that we'll go back with on the motel. So here are the existing conditions that you'll see, and this starts kind of where what I've printed out for you. So I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. This is existing conditions on the motel. So you can see the texture 111, the brickwork that's still existing. All of this is, when I ask you to look at how this looked in the original photo, these windows are a different size. So when in 1982, when they converted this to elderly housing, they basically rebuilt these walls, and they put in different windows, and they put them in at a different size. So, and you'll see they combined 2 rooms, so you would have twice as many doors in this arrangement. We will be going back to that original configuration, that original window size, the original accommodation of the air conditioning unit at the top, and that will then be the approach to restoration. All of the pipe columns, all of the railing, all of this fascia here, all of that is contributing and will be restored along the way. This is a non-contributing piece that'll come out. Here is the addition. This walkway will come off. This is a contributing piece of the 1968. So where you see this higher level, that's the 1968 piece coming off the back here with a stairway. This is also 1968, but these were glass, more like a typical all glass front motel that you would see in a single loaded motel. So that would come back to character of being more appropriate to more like what it was. Here is on the inside of the coffee shop where we're finding the original wood windows. So behind all that texture 111 on the outside, we actually have the fabric to restore the windows. A lot of all of this stuff is 1968, not contributing at all. But we do find evidence of how the 1968 piece, I'm sorry, this was 82. We did find evidence of how the 68 piece was constructed by virtue of markings, markings of where nail patterns or other kinds of characteristics that we can read the kind of action that took place that has been removed that helps us to know how to move forward. So in terms of the approach to treatment, we're going to be restoring this piece in those terms about restoring it to a point in time. And we're going to be we're going to be using the preservation terminology on this piece about the collective history of the building. And our first step will be to restore the exterior of this piece while the Park Service and the city work out the use program. There'll be some discussion about that so that when we do the exterior, for instance, we're going to have an elevator. That elevator may penetrate the roof in the 54 motel. So when we do the roof, we want to get good roofs on these buildings quickly. We want to accommodate that, so we'll have to make some decisions about where the elevator is going, for instance. This point right here is a condition that never existed. That is where those 2 buildings meet. When we take this piece off, which has the original restaurant behind it leaves a juncture that didn't exist because in '68 they built this wall in front of the original wall. So this corner we will treat in a way that in effect treats it as a corner of the '68 piece so that we can clearly differentiate the demarcation between 1954 and 1968. The rest of this building is pretty much in good shape in the sense that it's the original windows. The brickwork is all intact and in pretty good shape. So we'll be putting a new roof on that. We'll be doing some remedial work there, but on the exterior, the 68 piece is in pretty good shape. But this is a joint where we had to make a preservation decision about hierarchy and how to treat that particular corner so that we could focus on the 1963 period of significance in a more accurate way. You've heard a lot about the range of uses, and so here are the original uses, new features, elevator, visitor restrooms, staff or office, possibly. Again, all these are tentative. What happens with storage if they're going to use the parking court for events? You've got to have tables and chairs and other support things, so where does that get stored? Expanded restaurant. If we're going to have a legitimate full-service restaurant, we're going to have more kitchen capability than has ever been in this place. So how do we do that? That does require a certain degree of fire code response in terms of doing that in a careful way as well. So all of those things will evolve over time. So now, let me quickly run through the office building. So now we need to get in gear and get your heads into this project. One of the things that's been an anxiety for me has been, one, you're not architects. I don't expect you to be architects, but I am going to try to push you to think in physical terms. And I am going to push you to put things down in paper on drawings as a team. How you do that, I don't care. I don't care about the quality of it, but I am interested in you trying to think spatially, and I'll be your architect, but I want you to develop your own sense of a position about how to go about this building and the kind of uses that might fit. So the building, the Gaston office building, cost $1.2 million, according to reports. There was a 2 articles, 1959 and 1960 in Ebony magazine that I found a lot of this information. But it was $1.2 million, so today it's about a $10 million building. So if you go back to my early chart where I was talking about the economics, we're dealing with a $10 million building here in today's terms. It had 7, according to the article, it had 70 employees when it opened up. About 38,000 square feet on 3 floors. At an auditorium that was rated for 600 when they had the opening. The report was they had 1,000 people in there. The building official wasn't there that day. Yes. Pardon? The year was 1959, or 1960, I think was the year. 60-61 was the Ebony article. 59 is the date on the drawings. So 59-60 was the construction period. The building had an elevator, obviously an elevator. It had an intercom system, air conditioned, piped music, so it had a Muzak system. It was reported to have silk wallpaper in the executive offices. Had 2 employee lounges, solid oak furniture, fluorescent lighting, modern office equipment, and wall-to-wall carpeting. So you can see by digging around, you can find a lot of information about the building. Parallel to this, and I think I've got it in here. I'll come to that in a second. So here's the way the uses were distributed. On the first floor, you had the auditorium, and we'll see that today. You had the savings and loan. You had the Booker T. Washington insurance offices. So that was what I'll call the retail office. And on the 3rd floor, they had the back of house. So the retail offices where they met customers. 8 out of 10 African Americans in Alabama had a Booker T. Washington insurance policy. 8 out of 10. That's amazing. It had a Vulcan Realty Company and a franchise Walgreens store. So the drugstore down the way, I think, moved down after it moved out of the building, but it very early had a drugstore. and then the insurance company offices, I'm sorry, 5 out of 6. Insurance offices, back of house was on the second floor. The second floor, which really is an interesting, and this is a sort of a women's history piece, is that Mrs. Gaston ran the business school. And one report I read said that she told AG, we need a better environment for this. And that was one of the things that precipitated the development of this building. The whole second floor was a series of classrooms, and so you'll see that on the plans. And then the third floor was the offices and the back of house back of house insurance activities. So we know how the uses originally were distributed in the building. Yes. Yes. You know, I didn't find any record of the radio station in the early times. He must have brought it in later. I'll show you in a minute. There was a vacant space in the plans that is my guess where he put that. But when the building was done, there was an assignment, including the people's names who were going to occupy an office, on the drawings. But there was no radio station, and there was one vacant space. So that's my guess is what happened. Another thing I found, here was a list of the announcement of the reporting of the grand opening, and here was Bank Building Corporation, a specialized design build firm, very early design build firm from St. Louis. I spent a decade there after graduate school, and I knew people who worked at bank building, and of course they were still doing stuff, and it wasn't history yet to this level. And then I was in Salt Lake for a preservation meeting several months ago, and we took this tour, and they said, oh, here's one of our modernist buildings by Bank Building Corporation. So bank building is, they had quality designers, and you think about design build not being so much about design, but some of these early operations were very much design focused. And here were the suppliers. So I found that the Birmingham mechanical electrical plumbing contractor was Hardy Corporation. The steel supplier was Ingalls Ironwork. The signage was done by Dixie Neon. So now every time I look at a sign around here, I'm thinking like over on the lodge, I bet you Dixie Neon did that sign. They did all the Ready Kilowatt for Alabama Power, all those signs. And here, particularly important to me, is what I think is the curtain wall producer, which was Pittsburgh Plate Glass. So this one, in terms of the character of the building, that exterior glass and aluminum system is obviously a very important feature. And understanding, with a little more digging, we'll find that system and what its characteristics were, and know more about how those panels were created. We'll talk about that a little more when we're on site. So here is 1959. This is the way the building was designed. This is the first floor. You can see here is the drugstore. Here is the insurance company. Here is the bank. Here is this vacant retail space here. And here is the large assembly room that had a meeting room off of it. This is what's known as the finish schedule. This tells us every wall, ceiling, floor, what material was used. So we have a lot of information off of this to know what was there. So you can see terrazzo, the flooring, terrazzo, cement, asphalt tile, ceramic tile, wood, carpet. Baseboards were rubber, wood, ceramic tile, and plastic. Ceramic tile was typically in the bathrooms. I'm not sure where the plastic laminate may have been on custom casework. The bathrooms had a 4-foot ceramic tile wainscoting. The walls were plaster. The ceilings were acoustical tile and plaster. So when you go through and you can start to see what happened there, how it was designed. So here is the 2000 modification. So in 2000, and we'll meet Dr. Walker in a few minutes. Dr. Walker bought the building and was responding to the options he had for getting tenants. These were the plans that were done. They were submitted to the State Preservation Office for tax credit, and they were turned down, and they were never resubmitted. So what actually happened, and what you'll see, is neither of these things. After this time, Dr. Walker adapted this area for the housing authority, so the housing authority became a tenant. Basically a lot of little small offices down interior corridors. And so what I was hoping for when I did this, because I hadn't been in the building yet, was that we would find more fabric, particularly in the office part, than what actually exists. So there's a lot of the fabric that is not there. It makes the investigation a lot more challenging to kind of piece back whether you can tell a story about that or not. But that's the challenge you have here, is that we have very little fabric on the interior of the building. This is on the second floor, and you can see here, that these are purple or classrooms, so that was the business school. Actually, interestingly, this says for a rental tenant, so that whether that was for an expansion of the flexibility to have another classroom if enrollment grew, but on the drawings it showed as an additional rental space. The core is important from a functional standpoint. This is a building on a slab on grade, concrete slab on grade. So the plumbing's all coming into the building at this level, in this area of the building, and so ideally you want to try to work with that over time. And this is the stair, which is got a nice little detail. The original railing still exists. The elevator is in its same location. The cab, I think the door and frame are all the same, but the cab, which I haven't seen, but he said they changed it out in 2000. This is what the drawings look like at the time when they did these drawings. They didn't plan to change too much, so I thought, gee, this is going to be great. We might find some fabric. They, in fact, did change a lot. So this is on the third floor. So here was the executive suite. This was Dr. Gaston's office. And when you get up there, I want you to notice that there's a notable difference about this elevation than there is about the other elevations. I'll let you, if you don't figure it out, let me know. I'll tell you, but I think you'll figure it out. So anyway, these are executive offices. His attorney, there was a library, Mr. Butler, looks like F or P Butler. Sure what that is. But anyway, his assistant and conference rooms, etc. And then this was all insurance processing over here. So these were both offices, executive offices for the upper insurance management people, printing for their medical rooms for dealing with the medical information for clients, the controller, etc. Then you see the large room for the roof for the assembly. So this is pretty much the main part of the building, other than the assembly hall, with it going around the back. It's pretty straightforward. This is, I'm trying to make sure I get my numbers. This is 24, each bay is 2410 by 21.8. So this is just a grid of concrete columns with concrete slabs that span between the columns. Again, you'll see some of this. You'll see these features, but this was changed a good bit. The roof plan, there's a penthouse, and you'll see that. On top of the penthouse was this terrific Booker T. Washington Insurance Company sign, I'm sure by Dixie Neon. And this mechanical up here, there's some other things you'll see that are interesting. I'm not quite sure how they fit into the period of significance, but we can talk about that. So I've just here shown you the grid, and I think the grid is important because with so much fabric lost, in a certain sense, there's more flexibility because we're not trying to deal with as much fabric. I regret to say that, but the reality is that's what we're dealing with, and you come to each project with where you are. But still a fair bit of fabric left in here, and a couple of other places in the building. So I just wanted to show you quickly what we know about the building. This is an early rendering that was used in the early promotion of the building. And notice this piece here. It's really architecturally one of the most important parts of the building. And you'll see that when we go around. You'll see it here. All of these things are, there's your sign, are very important character defining features. This is an earlier, you'll notice I put here a yellow because it wasn't, I didn't know whether it was contributing or not. So I used red if it wasn't, and green if it was, and yellow is caution. I think I've looked at it a little more. I think I understand what's going on there, and we can talk about that when we get into the field. There's a shot of Dr. King out in front of the building at an early time. This is a picture of what of Dr. Gaston's office looked like. These were all from that Ebony article. This is an important restoration piece. It needs work, and it's going to be an important piece to restore. So this is a, you might say, well, gee, this is a shot of some flowers on the stage, but what this tells me is this was a wood stage with a turned down wood trim piece to it. When I went in there the other day, I believe the original stage is there. Probably this little fascia piece on the stage is there as well. Again, a feature that's important to the space. So here it is, the 600, this was 1,000 people for the opening. And that's the room you'll see here in a few minutes. But again, very important information that you can gather from looking carefully at old photographs. And I'm not sure, I think this may be one of the other offices. I think the other one was Dr. Gaston's. This, I think, is one of the other folks. This is my error. But you can see, again, the treatment shades. They made a point about the large plants, that plants were really an important piece of the interior design. Paneling, flooring, furniture, classroom. So here's what one of the classroom looked like. This was the drive-up teller's window in the in the savings and loan, and the teller line, so we know what the teller line looked like in the savings and loan. So you can see there's a lot of information that you can use to understand, for starters, and in some cases reconstruct if the objective is there. I thought this was important from just how the character of the signing was done on the real estate office. And then this was a great little shot. There were apparently 15 signs he put around town letting people know that this was here, and it was about Birmingham growing. So that's what I have to sort of get you ready to go look at this building. And for somebody from each team, pick up one of these packets so you'll have a set of. Okay, good. Are there any questions? Any questions about what I've covered, or?
There's no projected use of the building currently, correct?
That's your job. Yes. You'll be there. So but let me say, I'll go back to my comments the other day, is for me, preservation project has two owners. So one owner is the building, one owner is the owner. Not that, and the other thing is, owners have come to a project with a perspective, an idea, but not necessarily the idea. So I think that, again, to look for the things that are performance-wise, what the owner's trying to achieve. Well, certainly the owner's trying to achieve an income stream to make this project successful. So that's important. And however you choose to do that, you've got to have an idea of what that income stream is. And then how can you enhance that outcome by capturing the potential of this building, the qualities of this building. So this is clearly one of those buildings that's got a couple $100 of residual value in it, that if you take that and you add to it, you end up with something much bigger than if you tore it down and started over. Very good. Thank you.